In this video, I'm going to show you how to build more intelligent AI agents using CrewAI and InfraNodus. The core of this approach is that we will be using a feature of InfraNodus that allows us to detect content gaps in the output of the LLM, and then we can feed this information back to the LLM flows in order to generate better results. InfraNodus can also generate interesting research questions that bridge those content gaps, so we can also feed those questions back into the LLM workflows as prompts, and that will also increase the quality of the output that we're getting. So InfraNodus will be used as a tool in your agentic workflow. And the advantage of InfraNodus is that it can visualize what's going on under the hood. So you can always use the visual interface to understand what's actually happening and what features of the API you can use in your workflow. So this is how it works. And one important thing that I want to address also is that when we're talking about AI agents, there's usually a lot of misunderstanding in the field. Most of the stuff that you see on YouTube are actually about AI workflows. So when you see something executed in a straight line, where it's just a bunch of tasks and agents that are performing tasks sequentially, this is not AI agents, this is AI workflows. AI agents is something that works in a non-linear way, where there is some agent that observes what's going on and chooses what's happening next. So this is an important distinction to make. This video is about a tool, InfraNodus, that can be used both in AI workflows like this, which will be actually in most of the cases, or also in agentic workflows that are non-linear like that. So I just want to make this important distinction, not to feed into the AI agent hype. Now, I also want to talk about the tool that we'll be using. So I'm using CrewAI in this demonstration. This is because I tried several different tools that can be used to build AI agents, and I like it the most because it was easiest to set up. They also have some examples. They also have an open source version, so you can download some of the examples or templates they have and then build something by yourself using Python. But because you can also use an IDE like Windsurf or CrewAI, you can actually use AI to build those workflows. So this is not that difficult as it seems. And I'm going to show you how you can set it up and make it work. So let's get into it. First of all, you will need to download the templates that we have for CrewAI. I will leave a link in the description to the video. And once you download those workflows, you will see that we have a folder here that is called gap analysis and gap questions. And there is also a README file that explains how it works. So when you actually open it on GitHub, you will see like a description of what's going on under the hood and how it works. And then you can click on the support article as well here that explains this workflows in detail and explains the logic behind them and also which features of InfraNodus and of its API it's using. But once you download it, you will have a project which you can open in Windsurf or in CrewAI or in your favorite IDE. And I recommend to start from gap analysis. Inside gap analysis, you will have a folder structure where basically you will have several different things. Like if you go to the source folder here, you will see that it has config folder where you define the agents that you will be using. So these are the actual agents and you can describe them in detail. And in fact, it's also like a great way to learn how to build those agents. So you will have the list of the agents. Here we have researcher, gap finder, and reporting analyst. I actually use an example they have in the quick setup tutorial of CrewAI. So I think in their original version, they only have researcher and reporting analyst, but I added this gap finder so I can show you how we are actually finding gaps within InfraNodus. And what you do here is that you describe a role of the researcher and you can use the syntax topic in order to tell it which topic it's going to be researching, then the goal, and then the backstory is kind of like the context that helps the agent work better. And then the gap finder, it's finding gaps in the topic. And then the reporting analyst, it makes like an executive summary of what it's researched, of the gaps, and then delivers you the final result. So these are kind of like the roles that your agents will have. And the tasks are the actual things that they will be doing. And there can be several tasks, for example, that the same agent can do. Here, I actually have a task, one task for each agent, but you could have several tasks for one agent, for instance, and then you would have this more non-linear flow. In this example, just to make it easier, I'm going to show more like an AI workflow than AI agent workflow, right? So that it's easier to understand. So here we have 3 tasks: researching task for the researcher agent, gap finder task for the gap finder agent, and the reporting task for the analyst agent. Okay, now if you go into the other file that is called main, this one defines what's actually happening and which topic you're going to be researching. So on line 18, you can find the name of the topic that we'll be researching. Here I'm using AI LLMs just because if you're watching this video, then you probably know a thing or two about this topic, so it's going to be easier for you to follow. And current year just gives it like a context of when it's happening, but you don't have to use it. All right, and then it has also like a training and testing functions, but we don't need that now. So all you need to do is to change this topic to whatever topic you're interested in. You can also keep AI LLM. And then the final one is Crew. And inside Crew, we actually define the flow that we will be using. All right, so here we say that, okay, this is going to be a gap analysis template Crew. We will take the agents from the list of agents here. Then we will define tasks from the list of tasks. And then we present a sequential flow of how this workflow will unfold. So here we have the agent, which is the researcher first. We say it's verbose because we want to see what's happening under the hood. Then we will have another agent. The next one is gap finder. So basically what we're telling the system here is first you will do a research on that topic of AI LLMs. Then the next step is going to be finding gaps. And here is an important part, which I'm going to address later, where we actually use InfraNodus to find gaps. And I will show you how you can also run it without InfraNodus and what the difference is. And then the last one is the reporting analyst, and that agent will report the results to us. Okay, so you define the sequence of how agents will work and then the sequence of tasks below. So here it's kind of the same sequence: research task, gap finder, reporting. And then in the Crew definition, you actually tell to the system that you will be using these agents, these tasks, and the process will be sequential. If you use hierarchical, it's going to be more agentic in a sense, because you will have like the main agent deciding which one should be deployed. But even in this sequential one, you will still have some elements of agentic workflows. Because for instance, if the gap finder agent doesn't generate like a good result at the first run, then it will run it again. So that's also like an interesting aspect of those systems, that you don't have a precise idea of how they're going to run. But I think for research is amazing, because then you just leave it to do research and then it provides some really interesting results for you. And here is where InfraNodus comes in, because we're telling this agent that you can use this InfraNodus Gap Finder tool. And if we comment click on that tool, we can actually see the definition of this tool. It's in the tools folder. You have a custom tool, which is like an example, but we're using InfraNodus Gap Finder tool. And this is where we define how InfraNodus is going to be used in this workflow. And don't worry, you will not have to code anything, because we already have the template, so you can just reuse it. All you will need to do is just to replace the name of the topic that you want to research, right? So here in the tool definition, we're just saying that, okay, you will be having a function that saves things to a file. Then you will have this description of the tool, and this describes to the model how it should send data to this tool. So that's very important, because if you don't define that, it will not be able to communicate with this tool. And then here you're describing the tool. This is important to have a good description, so your LLM workflow knows how to use that tool. And here we're saying, okay, you will be using this endpoint, and this is the endpoint from the InfraNodus API. And what's going to happen is that you will send the text that you obtained through your research, and you will generate a response. And here there is a processing of the response in a way that we can deliver the information we need. This tool is analyzing the content gaps in whatever LLM did the research on. Okay, so our LLM will do research on AI LLMs. It will generate some text, and then InfraNodus will find a gap inside and then deliver this gap for further use by other agents. Just to give you a visual demonstration of how it works, it's going to be exactly that. We will have a certain response. I actually copied and pasted the response which I got here from the previous run. So this is kind of like a summary of what's happening in the field of LLM. that was made by that same agent. I visualize it as a graph, as a knowledge graph. That's what InfraNodus does. It shows me the main ideas inside. So it's talking a lot about AI, LLM, the main topics, how they connect. And then what it does is that it detects the content gaps, or we call them also blind spots here. And then it tells us, okay, so you could connect those topics better if you want to optimize this knowledge or to see where you're missing something. And this is exactly the information that we will retrieve using the InfraNodus API. So this is why InfraNodus is so good, because you can actually visualize what's happening under the hood and understand the logic a little bit better. Okay, so this is the gap that's going to be extracted. It will literally take these two topics, maybe some other topics depending on the results you will produce, but in this particular case it would be knowledge, reliability and bias frameworks, and it would say to the LLM workflow that, look, I identified those two topics that are not connected, so try to think of some connection between them specifically. And this is what makes it so different from just running it on a normal LLM, because the normal LLM, if you tell it find a gap, it's actually not producing very good results. So this is making it much more precise and also feeds the knowledge graph data into your agentic workflow. So once it gets this data, it's going to feed it back to the flow, and then you will have a result generated. And now I'm going to show you how that works. So I'm going to run it for you. For that, I go to terminal. I'm just going to clear my previous run. And then to run it, I just type in CrewAI run. I'm in this gap analysis field, and it's showing to us what's actually happening. So it's telling us it's running the crew. So it's running this initial crew that we initiated. And here it's saying, okay, I'm using the agent AI LLM senior data researcher. And the task is to conduct a research. So this is the output that it generates that I actually imported into InfraNodus. Okay, so this was what I was using to generate the graph. Then it shows us, okay, I actually used the gap finder tool. I used the tool, the InfraNodus gap finder tool, and here's the text which I sent it. So it's the tool input, and here is the result I got. So in fact, in this case, it was a gap between energy collaboration and language enhancement. And usually these will be topics that are not so easily connected. So this is why it's also showing you how to make it think creatively. And then it's telling us, okay, so this is the final answer. So it ran the gap finder again. This is the agentic part where we didn't ask it to run specifically once again, but it generated this gap, and then it was like, okay, now I'm gonna come up with an interesting statement based on this gap. Okay, so here it's saying there's a notable gap between the energy efficient practices and advancements in language support. So it's connecting these two topics here, exactly how I was showing you in the visualization, but it was two different topics because it generates different content every time, right? And then it's telling us, okay, so now the analyst is going to report the context that was generated, and then it creates an executive summary of what's going on in the field of AI LLMs based on this gap, right? And how we can improve it. And here it says like, okay, I identified some gaps, and here I'm going to make a conclusion. And here it's telling us, okay, bridging the gap between energy sufficient practices, so that's the energy topic that it identified, and advancements in global language support is not just a challenge, but an opportunity for AI LLM field by implementing collaborative approaches, fostering broad research agendas and advocating for practical policies. We can harness sustainable practices to enhance language diversity. So it's about also enhancing language diversity and the diversity of the output, and also connecting it to this idea of how you can actually integrate community into developing better quality results. And here it's giving us some specific examples of how it can work, right? So just to give you an example of how it would run without using this tool, I can just comment it out. Okay, so I'm just gonna pretend like this tool is not available to the gap finder agent. So in that case, it's just gonna be using the LLM itself. It's not going to be using InfraNodus. And then I run it again, and then it's going to do the same thing. Now the tool is not available, so it's going to do the same thing. It will first generate a research on the topic of AI LLMs. Okay, then the gap finder is just kind of trying to find the gap. So here it's saying that it found the gap in comprehensive strategies of integrating ethical considerations. And that's the funny thing. If you tell AI now, at least the OpenAI one, to generate a gap, it will always think about ethics. So we are actually effectively using InfraNodus to get rid of that bias that OpenAI has, because it always has to look at the ethics, at the responsible use and things like that, So it's also a great tool of actually getting rid of bias. And then it generates a response, the same response, based on the gap that it identified. But here it's telling us that the development of AI LLMs presents extraordinary opportunities, ethical considerations. So it's like make AI more ethical. I mean, we've heard it many times. This is not a gap. This is just something that OpenAI is trying to push at us at every response that you're getting. So this is a huge difference. You see, when you're using the tool of InfraNodus, you're actually making it focus on a specific gap that it identifies in the structure, like that, right? So it's really like it's the two things which are not yet connected in this discourse. And we're telling it, okay, generate something that would bridge this gap. And this is why it's so effective and useful to use these tools. And you can use this CrewAI template to integrate it into any other agentic workflows you have. So for example, you could use a template they have here for marketing research. And for instance, it scrapes some companies for you, right? And then you try to find the gap, like what they're all talking about, but what they're not connecting yet. And that could be the next innovative idea for you, or a way of presenting your services in your industry in a new way. So there's a lot of really interesting use cases for that. And I would be really excited to hear from you what it inspires you to make, and also how we can improve InfraNodus to make it work for you. So if you have any ideas, if you need some features which are not yet there, please let us know, and we will build this in and create CrewAI workflows, or also workflows for any other framework that you like using for building those agentic workflows. So this is how it works with the gap finder. Another thing I want to show you is that we also have a template that generates gap questions. And this one I really like, because it doesn't just generate like a gap, but it generates an actual prompt, which is then fed into the model to generate better results. So when you look at the Crew here, you will see that it's using a question generation task. Okay, so the only difference between those two templates is that like they have the same agents and same tasks, but where we had gap finder, here we have an agent and a task that's called question generator. And what it does is that it uses the InfraNodus tool to generate an interesting research question, which is then fed into the analyst, and then the analyst is producing a better result. So we can try to run it and see what's happening. So I'm gonna use CrewAI, but now I'm in the CrewAI gap questions one. I run this, and then what we get is that it's using the AI LLM data researcher to generate the content. So it's gonna generate this content for us. Then I'm going to show you what's happening behind the scenes. It generated some results. Here it's gonna then look at the gap. So it also uses this content gap detection feature. But what it does is that it generates a question based on that gap. Okay, so what is fed back into the flow is not the gap, is the question. So here it's gonna be like, okay, how I can connect those two topics in an interesting way. And here it's gonna be, for example, something like this. How can the integration of knowledge graphs and databases with LLM be designed to both improve reliability in providing contextually relevant information and actively reduce bias between global regulatory frameworks? That's actually really interesting. It's really related to what I was talking about bias before. I'm going to save it into my notes. This always happens when I'm using it. Even in demonstrations, I get really nice ideas. So it's kind of like giving me some inspiration as well. But basically, it generates this question, and then it feeds it back into this agentic workflow that we're using. So I'm going to show you here. Here are the gap questions that InfraNodus generated based on the gaps. It also gives it a graph summary. So this is kind of like a portable graph rag output, where it tells the model, this is the context you're dealing with. Please try to kind of like really focus on those gaps and make new relations. And then the question generator will generate the final question for the model. And here, once again, you see we're using the same gap: energy efficient LLM architectures that integrate into quantum computing, enhance data processing power, while adhering to ethical governance frameworks, ensuring sustainable AI advancements. So here it kind of like, it still thinks about ethics, but much less, because now it's focused on energy efficient LLM architecture and also quantum computing. So at least we're moving away from that ethical field into the more technical aspects as well, right? And then here it provides us a result based on those gaps, but that is much further removed from that ethical bias that it will naturally have. And by the way, if you notice that, for example, it somehow keeps on focusing on the same topic, what you can always do is to go back into the code, and inside this tool definition of InfraNodus, you can actually give it a specific gap it should focus on. So here there is some comments that show you what features you could use. So for example, if I say, okay, use gap number 2 or 1, for instance, right? And I run it again, then it's going to use a different gap. So this is also a way to make it come out from a specific gap that it's always focused on, and then generate a new one. And if you leave this field empty, so if you get rid of the gap depth completely, then it's going to use a random gap. So just show you what's happening under the hood again. Let's say that the gap 0 is this one. If I say use gap 1, it's going to be another one, this one. Gap 3, that one. Gap 4, that one, and so on. If I say a random one, it will just reiterate through them and find some gap that it hasn't yet thought of, and then it will generate some content in relation to this gap. All right, so I hope that you find this demonstration useful. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. This is still in the works, but I wanted to share it with you so I can get your feedback and see how to make it more useful for you. So please leave your comments below under the video. Also, please subscribe to this channel so that this video can get recommended to other people interested in this content. And let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.